Hello students, social work, counseling in social work research, dynamic perspectives of Sigmund Freud's concepts. Sigmund Freud was born in a pretty large family with several siblings. This gave him a picture of developmental pattern and his understanding about the dynamic forms of personality that developed over a period of time. His observations ranged from physical, social, emotional and psychological development of each of his siblings with diverse age groups. Though Freud has developed his theories on empirical evidence of his interactions with patients, yet his own family or his siblings' development, which he had witnessed over the years, have also played a vital role in his understanding of both dynamic nature and developmental perspective about personality. Therefore, it wouldn't be wrong to say that Sigmund Freud himself stands a base to view the dynamic and developmental perspectives of his concepts and theories, which have been recognized greatly as well as criticized mercilessly over the decades. During Freud's period, there was not much scope of degree in psychology as such. He was among the first in modern psychology who has written scientifically on unconscious mind, which has been extremely influential and popular, but full with controversies as well. The suggestion of Freud was that most behavior of individuals is decided by psychological drives, that individuals in general are mainly not aware of what's happening of mind in their own. Other researchers did not consider it positively. However, in 1905, his propagation about solid sexual urges from a very beginning of the life, and few of the urges remain focused to an individual's mother and father, puts the researcher in more discomfort. After the completion of this lesson, one should be able to explain the meaning of term dynamic in the context of Sigmund Freud's concepts, its elements and importance of dynamic perspective of personality. 2. Explain the dynamic nature of personality with the help of different stages of psychosexual development of an individual. 3. Elaborate the concepts of id, ego and superego in the context of dynamic perspective of personality. Dynamic approaches of personality explained by Sigmund Freud includes interest for the process through which the needs, motives and impulses, which are often hidden from a particular view, are tend to interact, which produces the individual's behavior. Assumptions of this form are psychodynamic framework considered to be unique. The uniqueness highlights the fact that none of the personality theories have been able to agree with the three ideas in their original form. The assumptions of the approach are as follows. Primacy of the unconscious. This particular approach has contended that most of the processes of psychological nature which happen in the absence of individual's consciousness. To put in other words, activities of the mind or psyche have been recognized to be mainly unconscious. Most of the mental activities that are largely inaccessible to the consciousness are memories, motives and feelings and the like. Critical importance of early experiences. This particular approach emphasized that happenings in the very beginning of childhood tend to pivotal the shaping of an individual's personality. However, the concept of this particular view remains matchless as long as it advocates this kind of happenings as factors of an individual's dynamic and personality development. Causality. Particular assumption in this concept considers that everything that happens in one's mental activities happens for a reason, and it would be not advisable to consider the existence of concepts such as random thought, feeling, motive or behavior. Furthermore, the concept has been considered to be called the principle of psychic causality. Many of the investigators affirm to a fact which says opinions, motives, emotional reactions and expressed behavior will not rise unsystematically. Instead, can be due to the arrangement of recognizable biological and psychological processes. As per the understanding of Hall, Linley and Campbell about Sigmund Freud's developmental perspective of personality, the child moves via a sequence of dynamic distinguished phases during the initial 5 years of life. Later on, since the 5th or 6th years in the latency phase, dynamics run into the relatively be stable. In beginning of teenage years, dynamic forces explode once more in addition to tend to later on progressively be stable because teenager turns to be adult. However, he believed that the very beginning of life's some years tend to be significant to the creation of personality. The developmental model of Freud is said to be on the basis of the assumption of infertile sexuality. The stages in the Freud's developmental model are named as psychosexual because it is a sexual urge that drives the acquisition of psychological characteristic. Unfortunately, this was a point on which Freud was understood by many. In his utilization of the term sexuality, he wasn't really referring exclusively to the genital sexuality, but his understanding was that the sexual forces that drive the developmental stages all reflect different types of bodily pleasures. The bodily pleasures change in accordance with their sites as physical maturation leads to a normative sequence of erogenous zones, each of them with a different set of characteristic actions and objects. In Freud's model of psychosexual development, a child may witness unsettled fights between physical drives and arousal of social expectation as it moves via 5 stages. A conflict exists in each of the stage which should be settled prior the child can move to the next stage. Oral, 0 to 1.5 years of age. The primary source of pleasure in this particular stage is attained from the mouth. It includes tactual stimulation of lips and oral cavity and swallowing. During this stage, a baby almost is dependent upon its mother, who eventually turns to be the basic object of child's libido. This may lead to arousal of several feelings such as dependency as well as feeling of this form tend to continue in general lifelong even in the presence of later ego development. Commonly, 2 ways of behavior are observed during this particular stage: oral incorporative behavior, that is taking in, and oral hostile or oral sadistic behavior, biting or spitting out. The oral stage concludes at the time of weaning. Fixation may occur if some libido has remained. Anal, 1.5 to 3 years of age. This stage is primarily related to developing healthy toilet training. It was the belief of Freud that the familiarity of toilet training in this phase has an important influence on development of individual's personality. Though the child could experience an erotic pleasure through defecation, the child is supposed to postpone or delay this form of pleasure with the beginning of toilet training. A feeling of relief is being produced once the removal of feces takes place from the source of discomfort. It is in common the second year of a child's life is witnessed to the introduction of such forms of training, following which provides the child with experience of its very first instinctual instinct through the monitoring of external environment. Specific traits and values being formulated in an individual are the result of consequences of the special way of toilet training put into practice by the mother as well as emotions of the mother related to excretion. If parents were highly authoritarian as well as repressive, that particular boy or girl might inhibit its feces and turn out to be constipated. Whereas, if the parents were of the type of an individual who appeals his or her boy or girl to have a bowel movement and who compliments boy or a girl generously for his or her practices for the same, the boy or girl will obtain a belief of entire act of being generating feces to be particularly significant. Phallic, 3 to 5 years of age. The emphasis of pleasure in this phase tend to move from the anus genital. Sexual and aggressive feelings related to genital organs functioning tend to be the highlight in this stage. Appearance of Oedipus complex would beset the stage for desires of masturbation as well as life imaginations. It is understood that the mood manifests by their own imaginations of the child in the process of masturbation as well as in the alteration of affectionate and disobedient behavior towards the parents. It is said that attitudes towards the differing sexual category as well as to individuals in with authoritarian position are mainly habituated by this mechanism. In reality, male as well as female tend to love mother as she was observed to be satisfying their needs, whereas they both are less interested of their father because he was observed to be as rival of the mother's affection. The boy tends to be imagining his strong opponent to hurt him, and the boy's worries for the same might be in real sense be affirmed by intimidations via an anger as well as punishing father. The fear of the boy towards his father tends to focus around the injury of genital organs, which are the basis of lustful emotional state. Freud calls this sort of fear as castration anxiety. This form of fear basically makes a suppression of erotic wishes for the mother and unfriendliness towards the father. Correspondingly, an individual's erotic feeling of harmful nature towards mother would be converted as an offensive friendly affection for her, whereas a girl who tend to exchange her actual love object, that is the mother, for a new object, father. It basically occurs so because the girl is disappointed to discover that a boy owns an expanded sex organ, that is the penis, whereas she only owns a cavity. As a result of this realization of her, she considers mother to be responsible for her castrated condition. Thereby, she tends to weaken the cathexis for the mother. Furthermore, the girl relocates love towards father as he owns the valued organ which she seeks to share with him. Shared love of her for the father as well as to other men would however be combined with a feeling of envy because they own something which she doesn't. This particular phenomenon is called as penis envy in the case of girls. Girls visualize to have lost something valuable, whereas boys on the other hand is afraid of losing it. Furthermore, Freud also believed that all the individuals irrespective of gender are naturally bisexual. The particular condition of bisexuality tends to complicate the Oedipus complex through introduction of sexual cathesis for the same sex parent. Oedipus and complexes emergence and development are the principal actions of phallic period. Latency, 5 to 12 years of age. Since the conflicts in the phallic stage are dealt by the ego, an interval of psychological phase occurs. The sex drive is hidden, which is in general monetarily directed in school activities, hobbies and social skill development. When individual enters adolescence, the sexual impulses reappear at a conscious level and the genitals again become the focus of pleasure. Genitile, 12 to adulthood. In this particular stage, a person gets satisfaction via stimulation and modification of his or her own psychic. As a result, different individuals might be catheted just for a reason of helping to deliver extra methods of body pleasure to kid. Furthermore, adolescents begin to love fellow beings for unselfish reasons, unlike just only selfish motives or self-observed motives. Several things tend to show up themselves, such as erotic fascination, socialization, group activities and preparation for marrying and raising a family. Furthermore, one can witness an individual Being the individual turns to be converted from a pleasure-seeking, narcissist infant to a reality-oriented socialized adult. It is, however, suggested that it is not to be considered that pre-genital instincts are being moved by genital ones. Instead, the cathexis on the oral, anal and phallic stages end up being united as well as produced with genital instincts. Reproduction is the very basic principle of biological function of the genital phase. The achievement of this end in general is provided through an assured amount of constancy and safety by psychological experts. Experiences during these stages are filtered via basically 3 stages of human mind. Freud says that each of these stages play a pivotal role in development of an individual's personality, though an interdependence could be witnessed among the 3. Comping and functional ability of an individual with respect to foresight could be based on an individual's ability to solve the conflict from within at every particular stage of his or his development. Iceberg is what Freud used to compare with his concept of mind, as he believed that such a comparison shall help to address and explain the experiences of conscious versus unconscious. It was his argument that range of consciousness is only the mind's 1/10, whereas the remaining is unconscious. Mental activities of which individuals in general are unaware and information of which is in general difficult to access when needed are referred as unconscious. Intolerable impulses and wishes, according to Freud, are placed in an individual's unconsciousness with the help of a process known as repression. The well-known concept of slip of the tongue, as suggested by Freud, are in real sense sexual or aggressive impulses which unintentionally tend to slip out of an individual's unconsciousness. In an effort to understand the reason behind such happening, linguistics argue that these are the result of an individual being tired, nervous, or may not be an optimal level of cognitive functioning. Development of an individual's personality, according to Freud, is the result of conflict between 2 forces: an individual's aggressive and pleasure-seeking drives of biological nature versus his or her internal, that is socialized, control over these drives. Furthermore, Freud had opinion that an individual's personality is the result of an individual's efforts to maintain equilibrium between these 2 competing forces. Freud has attempted to simplify the understanding of this mechanism with the introduction of 3 interactive systems within an individual's mind, which are named as id, ego and superego. Id, ego and superego come under the dynamic aspects of personality. The id, a function of which depends on principle of pleasure, refers to all the rebellious and inappropriate demands, wishes, intentions and striving. According to Freud, the id stands for untamed passions and is a storehouse of seething excitement. Most of the times, it is considered to be a storage of libido. Libido is referred to the energy of sexual urges. The unconscious nature of id makes it to always expect to seek pleasure and immediate gratification irrespective of the means of satisfying the wishes and demands, be illogical, irrational and harmful. The id is completely directed by the norm of pleasure and avoidance of pain, which further matches approximately to the popular conception of beast in man. According to Freud, id is also the chief tank for both the life and death instincts. It, in addition, is also the container of unorganized excitements and desires. The ego. The ego refers to I or the conscious intellect. It refers to elaborative ways of behaving and thinking. Therefore, it is the executive division of personality. In the process of it, functioning ego tends to delay the satisfaction of its motives and it attempts to guide behavior in a more socially acceptable manner. It basically tends to deal all the psychological processes such as thinking, perception, memory, judgment, reasoning and action. It is responsible for a person to engage in work, to make a living, mingle with people and let an individual to adjust to the realities of life. It monitors the gratification of unreasonable and harmless wishes and strivings by being able to maintain an equilibrium between the id and superego's wishes. Whereas, the ego refers to I form of an individual which helps him or her to think, feel, consider and then decide certain things in practical manner. Ego in general is majorly conscious and slightly unconscious and it is capable of functioning at any particular levels of consciousness. Above all, it is considered to be having higher proximity of contact with the physical reality as well as external world. The fact of outside reality is well perceived by ego and this perceptual ability of the ego makes it modify a part of id because of its closeness to outside world. The ego perceives the existence of outside reality and is only a part of the id which becomes modified because of its proximity to the external world. It could be understood clearly that the egos stand are towards reason and circumception, whereas the id stand is for inexperienced passions. Balancing the demand of the id and superego with respect to the reality is a basic task of ego and therefore is called by Freud as acting on the reality principle, the superego. The superego consists importantly the prohibitions that are learned and also observed from parents and significant others. The development of superego takes place when a child engages in conversations with others and this form of conversation helps that child to learn the social rules for right and wrong. The superego plays a role of conscience in an individual. It also functions to be the moral guide suggesting to an individual to how and should forms of behavior. It strives for perfection and judging an individual's behavior explains the effort of the superego to be perfect. This effort of superego later on be responsible for the development of the feelings of pride as well as feelings of guilt when an individual tends to be not reaching to ideal feelings. Superego may sometimes tend to call a certain behavior of an individual as wrong, which in general the ego may try to satisfy the needs of id. The ego is considered as a rational part of an individual's personality, which obviously is in dissimilarity to the instinctual id and the rule based superego. For Freud, it was the self and something that others could see as a part of an individual's personality. As the id wants to be gratified instantly regardless of consequences to its demands. On the other hand, superego suggests that one must act in accordance of socially acceptable ways. The ego therefore gets into the task of finding the middle ground. It eventually takes the responsibility to assist the satisfaction of desires of the id. A person with solid ego who can maintain equilibrium of the demands of the id and superego, according to Freud, will have a healthy personality. It was observed that Freud has insisted in saying this, inequalities in the system can result neurosis, a tendency to experience negative emotions, anxiety disorders or unhealthy behavior. A person, example, might be narcissist and impulsive if he or she is dominated by their id, being controlled by the feelings of guilt and also to deny themselves from socially acceptable pleasures too can be a person dominated by his or her superego. On the other hand, being weak or completely absent in superego might turn a person into a psychopath. A completely absence of awareness of one's own emotions and being overly defensive in case of neurotic could be seen as a result of overly dominated superego in an individual because they are overly controlled to extent to lose their rational grasp on reality. A new method of hypnosis was learned by Freud from Dr. Joseph Breuer in the dealings of cases related to hysteria and their treatment. Later on, he slowly developed his own unique free association method. Method of free association and self-analysis are considered to be two great achievements of Freud's scientific life by Ernest Jones. Free association method, unlike cathartic, never intends to stop with the origin of symptoms. Instead, it permits and requires patients to talk about anything and everything that tends to occur to them without any form of restriction and without any attempt to produce logical, organized or meaningful interactions. Being passive is the role which the therapist needs to perform, as he or she is supposed to sit and listen, stimulate something to ask questions, to know more about the talks of the clients, especially when the patient seems to reduce his or her verbal flow, but never with an intention to disturb the patient while he or she talks. In order to minimize the influence of external distractions for the session, in general, the session is held in a quiet room. Freud insisted that continuous chain of meaningful associations exist from first to last sentence with regard to patients' disorderly verbalizations. In the understanding of Freud, everything said by the patient is related to their previous statements without any kind of exceptions. It is said that the concept of dream analysis is not different from that of free association, as it is a usual consequences of the instructions given to the patients that they are supposed to talk about anything and everything that comes to their mind. Freud believed that the reports of dreams and the free association are significant in understanding the dynamics of human personality. After testing one's own dreams, Freud developed his theory, which says that the dream is an expression of the most basic functioning and content of human mind. In his understanding, dreams serve two purposes. Firstly, guardian of sleep is what they serve as for the dreamer by distinguishing wishes whose traumatic content otherwise could coer his or her to wake up. They are considered to be royal road to the unconsciousness, as the task of an analyst is to revisit the dream work and express a symbol that reveals the latent content. In the words of conclusion, it could be surely said that dynamic theories of Freud and his successors have had the substantial influence not only in the field of psychology, but also sociology, anthropology and literature, especially more on Western thought in general. Few concepts such as defense mechanism have had a greater attention of the researchers over the years, as the result have been successful to enjoy a wide range of acceptance for the concepts of the same. Saying that inequities.